Okay, good evening and welcome to the latest installment of Building the Scottish State. And I have the great pleasure to have with me again MP Angus MacNeil, who is going to talk to us about the recent election and whatever else comes up. So first of all, Angus, thanks for being with us this evening.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Mark. My great pleasure again.
I mean, I asked you to appear on the show in previous weeks, but you were reticent to do so, wanting to wait for the election to take place. So how do you view what happened in the election with Alba Party and with the lack of a plan, of an articulated plan B? How do you see everything at this point?
Yeah, so on your question there, I suppose the big thing to take from the election is that the majority of people voting this time voted for independence. If you look at the way the constituency seats went, with the 72 seats for the SNP and the Greens, and when you count the list votes with SNP, Greens, Alba, and indeed your man, the land reformer, his name has just dropped out of my head.
In the Highlands. Andy Whiteman.
Andy Whiteman, indeed, yeah. There was a majority anyway without Andy Whiteman. I mean, it's quite, I think it's something like 2.6 million. That was 2,685,805 versus 2,657,698. So it was a sliver of a majority for the independent supporters when you aggregate the two votes. We won the list. On the list numbers, we won the first past the post on the first past the post rules, and aggregate we won too. So it's a good situation for us to be on for independence. You did mention, however, the referendum, and the question still remains: can we have a referendum? You might vote for free bus passes to Mars every week, but you might not be able to deliver that, and it might be very similar with a referendum. We know we voted for a Section 30, but it's very likely we ain't going to get that. And we're going to then try and legislate for one ourselves if we have the power to do that. And if we do, will we go to court? Well, the UK government says it won't, but you can be sure their fronts, Michael Gove's pal Gordon Brown will probably be doing that, or funded in a roundabout way to do that. Who knows? Something's going to happen. So the referendum might not happen. I mean, I think everybody talks about the referendum, but if it doesn't happen, we either wait till 2026 or the MSPs look at themselves and decide that they're going to resign and create an election. There is a majority to create an election that is solely about independence. So we have a ballot box event on the Scots franchise voting on the issue of independence. And we're seeing the movement. The movement's quite clear. And of course, I think if we keep the momentum going and don't stall, there's a lot of things we can do at the same time as the pandemic. Like Boris Johnson's capable of dealing with a pandemic and sending gunboats to the Channel Islands, as we know. I think we in Scotland should also be capable of dealing with the pandemic and also sending a letter to Boris Johnson about the Section 30, and just to get that formality out of the way. We know it's going to be a no, but it's going to be a different no this time. If people while the attention's on it and the momentum's on it, people are going to be indignant about the no, given what's happened to the election. The sense of fair play that people have innately wouldn't be impressed with Boris saying no. Many on Boris's own side probably wouldn't be impressed with him saying no either. Yeah, that's another point that we have to bear in mind.
Mm-hmm. And what do you get, being in Westminster, what do you get about the general feel of that? I mean, do you have colleagues or Tory colleagues who are saying, yeah, the Scotland has a mandate, or is there any kind of sentiment about that you can detect?
Well, I've not been in Westminster since September. This is one of the great joys of having great internet connections, better than Westminster and your Croft in the Outer Hebrides, is that you don't need to go to Westminster anymore. Incidentally, when they come to renovating the Palace of Westminster, they don't need to worry too much about whether they want to decant us all. They just need to give us decent broadband, or make sure that the poor Shire Tories have decent broadband, that they can keep up with the Crofters of the Hebrides then with their connectivity to the world. But I do know, I mean, privately, a number of Tories and Labour don't care what Scotland does. They've got their own worries. Everybody's got their own worries in life, Mm-hmm. The idea that they're thinking about us, if Scotland goes the way Ireland went, it's gone, happens. And similarly, when many Scottish nationalists go on about the international community, this sort of abstract concept of the international community. The international community is getting on with their own world, on their own life. And then last thing they're thinking about is Scotland, or even refereeing the situation for Scotland. So Scotland's got to get a situation that's accepted within Scotland. We need a ballot box event where that happens. And we can create that if the referendums are blocked, or we wait till 2026. We have to be absolutely clear. Nobody before the election could guarantee a referendum, and nobody after the election can guarantee a referendum either. I'd rather we moved on it now and found out the truth of the referendum situation rather than dilly-dally for quite a while. I think at least we can get the Section 30 done. That's going to be a no anyway. You can ask it yesterday, or you can ask it in 2 years' time. It's still going to be.
And what about you voting in Westminster? Do they still have these rules where are you able to vote, or do they have? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they had one where we're actively participating, but Jacob Rees-Mogg didn't like that so much. So we've got the whips have got our votes in the back pockets that they sort of bring forward, which is why I think there was a headline saying the Alapa party hadn't been voting the two MPs and that, well, they wouldn't have had a whip present in Westminster. So you need to send somebody present in Westminster in your group to vote.
Okay.
And that's been happening. But, and I've been hearing across parties that if individuals want to vote a different way, the whips have been faithful in voting one way and then voting the other way. So the whips have been following the conscience and the direction of individual MPs in the few occasions that's happened. But of course, we should remember it's a Christmas present election that we gave Boris Johnson. He's won each and every vote anyway, so votes aren't as significant as they were prior to the gift we gave Boris in December 2019. Okay.
All right. And what do you think are the alternate routes to independence? I mean, Nicola Sturgeon has said that after after the economy is recovered, after the COVID, pandemic has subsided, and whatever that means, do you think that's meaningful? Do you think that there should be much more kind of, detail given to those propositions of what would need to transpire before there was a referendum, or before they even asked for a referendum? How do you see that, just in terms of, what the next steps should be?
Well, I mean, I think if the COVID recovery, the Scottish Government really can control the health response. The economic response will be that of Westminster. So if the choice of the Scottish Government should be, I think they're doing a better job of the health response than Westminster. I think most people would agree that the devolved governments in Wales too, in fairness, have been doing a better job than Westminster has. But if it comes to the economy, and if we're going to leave the economy until that comes back to some sort of sense of what we've had in the past, until after COVID, before we think of independence, we're essentially saying that we're washing our hands of it. We are playing Pontius Pilate to the economic needs of Scotland, and we're leaving that in the hands of Rishi Sunak. And that, of course, is a choice for the MSPs to make in Edinburgh. That will be their area. If they feel that they're better not in charge, and that Rishi Sunak is better in charge, then they will stand back and let that happen. If, of course, however, they believe Scotland is better at making decisions and shaping policies for Scotland, then I would imagine that after the health issue is done, probably, well, it depends, and we all know it's a moving target, but it depends on the Indian variant and any other variants, but it could be the autumn time, really, with the health response will be mostly done. I think some experts, then it's the economic responses will be shaped by the Westminster government. So it's up to us. Do we leave that to be shaped by Westminster, to return to a sense of we had in the past? And the past wasn't great. It was huge inequalities and everything else that goes wrong when you've got the Tories in charge shaping your economy. When you've got the extremists that are the Tories, the economic extremists of Europe, that are the Tories set in Scotland's economic weather, then it's, I don't know, it's an uncomfortable position to be as somebody who wants Scottish independence, to say that, and for my colleagues to say, let's wait until Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson control all the levers of the economy to get us back to the old inequalities.
Mm-hmm. And what are the levers? And when you speak about levers of the economy, what are the main ones that what are the main powers that Scotland needs to have to get out? Well, to manage the economy better, but also to to recover, as quickly as possible. I mean, if you were able to wave a magic wand and give the Scottish government in competent hands the powers, the economic powers to recover as quickly as possible, what specifically would those be?
Well, I think you need the powers over taxation, quite obviously, choose where to tax and where to spend. But I think you also need the powers of currency too. And people say, how long will a currency take to set up? It shouldn't take that long. It hasn't taken very long in other countries. So I think you need both of those. There are 180 currencies worldwide. Be 181. The Bank of England is thinking actually of creating another currency almost in the blink of an eye. There was a little said about it about 3-4 weeks ago, and I think they're just getting on and doing it. But unless you have the powers of any normal independent country, you are going to be in the West. You're going to be left to the mercy of what your neighbours choose. And if your neighbours happen to be right-wing economic extremists, you will get right-wing economic extreme policies. And if you moan about them, it's partly because you've abdicated responsibility of taking the powers yourself. I think I said in a tweet this week,
I was going to get onto that because I saw it regarding what happened in Holyrood. Correct, yes. And in that case, you had the Home Office sending a van to abduct 2 Indian nationals, and who knows what happens to them after. Do they get sent to a detention center? Do they get, what happened? We don't know what happens to them. Maybe you know more than I do. But the whole idea that the UK government can send in a van and abduct 2 Indian nationals who I don't know what their legal status was, but and you made it, and explain more about your tweet and what you saw as the main meaning of what you tweeted.
Yeah, well, I basically said that for as long as we choose to leave matters in the hand of the Home Office, we can't really complain. If in future we do, I think the actual tweet was if we're reluctant to move to Scottish independence and the Home Office start snatching people off Scotland's streets, we really can't complain about it, because the complaint should be about us not doing something to get rid of the Home Office. We can get rid of Home Office snatch squads following Priti Patel's policies in Westminster quite easily. It only takes pieces of paper, a pencil, and metal boxes, and we have either a referendum or a ballot box event, be that an election or whatever, and then we shape our own immigration policy. I do know of many places that are struggling to get chefs. One of those individuals was a chef, and the other was a motor mechanic. So obviously both with skills. Quite why we're getting rid of people that have got skills like that, who knows? It's probably to keep the Daily Mail inspired politicians of Westminster and some odd parts of England happy. But this isn't, and if they want to get rid of chefs and motor mechanics, let them. But we in Scotland particularly don't want. It doesn't matter whether from India or not. We wanted these characters here. They've been here for 10 years, and they should stay here. I was really proud of the community in
that was Southside. Honestly speaking, it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I can't even conceive of that happening in, I don't know, Texas, where I've lived before, or even England. You probably have the neighbors cheering on the immigration authorities. I don't know specifically, but it was really inspiring to see the community, in a place like Pollokshields, where they have a lot of immigrants. They're their neighbors. They're not, derided as immigrants, and they're, accepted much more. And it was just seeing that was really, really inspiring.
Maybe that they're celebrated as immigrants. We don't always need to have negative adjectives when
absolutely,
dealing with immigrants, because many of our own relations have been migrants to Canada or to New Zealand,
or the United States, like my dad. Exactly. Get on to a couple of questions. What's your thoughts on SNP MP staying in Scotland and not returning to Westminster like Sinn Féin? You've got the SNP has a much larger contingent than Sinn Féin, so conceivably they could make more of a difference numerically. But what is your view on that?
No, I think wherever Scotland's issues are discussed, we've got to be there. There's huge issues decided about Scotland at Westminster. I know we're going to lose all the votes. You can go back and Google the articles from October 2019 when I warned the SNP not to do the election, and then the justifications that were there for doing the election. But unfortunately, the poll said Boris was going to get a majority. He got a majority. We ain't going to win the votes. but we do need to raise issues, and we do need to protest about some of the things that are happening and raise awareness. If we don't do that, it'll be a easy peasy stroll in the park for the Conservatives. At least by being in Westminster, you are moaning about the things that they're doing to people and to society, and to many of the vulnerable people in our society. So, I mean, I'd rather we didn't have to be there, in the way that we don't have to be in Berlin or Paris or Dublin because they don't control our powers. I'd rather that Scotland shifted and moved and took responsibility for our own lives, rather than leaving many of the responsibilities of Scotland to be decided by people elsewhere. I mean, the Portuguese don't do that and let the Spanish do it. The Czechs and the Slovaks don't let one another do it. The Austrians don't let the Germans do it. The Danes don't let the Swedes do it. And why are we doing this in Scotland? And patently we're voting different ways, and we're not getting what we want at the ballot box. So surely there's a better way of doing it. But while those powers are there, unfortunately, we have to go there.
Okay. And next one, do you think a general election is a realistic prospect? We're talking about first of all, that there's these new voting laws that are more restrictive. Obviously, been talking to their buddies in the United States who have been passing more restrictive voting ID laws. But do you see a general election coming up? Is that in the air?
No, I don't think so. I mean, many people are talking that Boris Johnson might go after the 3.5 years rather than 4.5 years. But I don't know if Boris Johnson wasn't particularly bothered either way about going 3.5 years rather than 4.5 years. But I think it'll be 2024 before the next election. Might be 2023, but that's a UK general election. But I can't see it being any earlier than that. Of course, we could say run the Westminster system there, that first past the post seats equate to some mandate for independence. That could be a possibility. We do. Yeah. Okay. And let's see. And why do you think it is? I mean, all this stuff has been coming into the news about Boris Johnson and the refurbishing of Number 10. David Cameron and all of this cronyism. And I'm just wondering. I mean, you work in Westminster. How can this level of corruption exist without any kind of real safeguards, or at least alleged corruption? I mean, maybe it's been determined if this actually occurred, but it just seems to me as if it's like, how corrupt do you have to be before there could actually be checks and balances to stop this type of corruption that is apparent to many of us? Well, I mean, I think the recent example of Boris Johnson has shown the limitations of the ministerial code. He's judge and jury of the ministerial code. So many things are set up with the ministerial code. You can set the frame of investigation and then find that no rules have been broken. But I mean, I think with Boris Johnson it may be a higher bar, certainly with the Electoral Commission starting to look into things, and it may be that there are criminal laws to be found as well. But all these things are slow. One thing that's certain is Boris Johnson's not going to have any shame. He's not going to put his hands up and fess up to say, actually, he's not going to tell you even who lent him the money first before he paid the money back to renovate the flat, because the 30,000 wasn't enough or whatever to renovate a flat for the Prime Minister. I mean, there's something else not telling you that we're being governed by people who are not similar to ourselves and those round about us.
Yeah. And what do you know about this next question ties in with what has been the work done by the Scottish government on currency, pensions, and many other subjects. And there's the perception. I mean, I remember watching an interview with between Andrew Marr and Nicola Sturgeon, and he was asked, borders. I mean, it was typical BBC type thing. What about the borders? What about this? What about that? Currency and all that. And she did, and she basically said, "Well, I don't have answers to those questions. They will be answered before next referendum because the economic situation will have changed." But what do you know about work that has gone on in terms of preparing for independence that could start now? And I mean, in my view, should be being done at this point in preparation for independence. I mean, what is your knowledge of background work that is being done on what independence would look like in terms of currency, these types of things?
In no better than what anybody else has got. I mean, the lines of communication with ourselves as MPs aren't quite what some people might imagine they would be. We find out in the newspapers just as everybody else does. And so therefore I know that there's been very little civil service activity on these areas. On the good news in currency, we know that Tim Rideout's been doing an awful lot of work and drawing in experiences across the world and pulling in some influential figures to sort of do that kind of work. So there'll be something for the SNP to pick on, or the Scottish Government, I should say, to pick on when they want to move on that. On borders, I mean, borders are going to be reasonably simple. Your southern border with England is going to be a function of all the borders that England has with everybody else in the world. England's chosen a hard border with everybody. Yeah. Therefore, you're going to have that kind of border. You're going to have the border that they've got with France. If you're out of their customs union and single market, this is a function of customs union and single market borders, and the borders, and see them between Sweden and Norway, are a 15-minute delay. We won't have a sea border. Obviously, we will have a land border. People come up with the paperwork or whatever, and that'll be dealt with, and they move on. But I think it'll be a time for England to start to realise that, rather than taking control of the borders, everybody else has got control of the borders as well, and they're isolated. They'll have got borders to the south of them, borders to the west of them, borders to the north of them, and borders to everywhere else run about. There's not a trade deal they're going to have that they haven't got bits of paper. They haven't got the market that they thought they had. And it might be that Scottish independence might be the wake-up call for the idiocy and the stupidity that is Brexit to come to an end. On that, I saw Lord Frost talking today that Brexit's allowed the UK the freedom to go and make trade deals across the world. Well, the Brexit damage cannot be undone with a trade deal with each and every country that's left in the world, even if you give it the decades to negotiate it. The best you'll make back is probably about 0.6 to 0.7% of GDP. Now, for context, I often tell people that Brexit cost 4.9% of GDP. An American trade deal is worth about 0.2%. So if we call that 4.9%, call it 4.90. You've thrown away 4.90 and you're hoping for 20 pence deal with America, or a 2 pence deal with Australia, or a 1 pence deal with New Zealand. The best you can get with the rest of the world is about 60 or 70 pence. So the Scottish independence and borders might be the wake-up call from this basic numerical stupidity that has been entered into in England. And they might realise, finally, that it's better for them to be in a single open market. It's funny when somebody remarked recently for people who are self-avowed free traders to give themselves no free trade with anybody at all anymore, but give themselves paperwork and tariffs with everybody.
Yeah. And what is your view in terms of of EU membership relative to EFTA, EEA membership? Do you have views on that? Because I know it's the SNP policy to get back into the EU, but I've done research in my group that I've spoken about before, and we've talked to people in EFTA, and Scotland could join EFTA relatively quickly as long as it has, as long as the Scottish government has the competence to sign the international treaties and the powers to abide by them. They could be in EFTA relatively quickly, and nothing would prevent them from joining the EU later. How religious are you on that, on the whole EEA, EFTA, EU thing, and how do you see it? Because in my view, Scotland becoming independent and then applying to join the EU. I mean, assuming we're, I don't know, a year or two off from any kind of referendum or whatever, and then they apply, and Spain's not going to make it easy. They've already made it pretty clear about that. How do you see all that? I mean, what's your view on Scotland within Europe, whether in EEA, EFTA, or the EU?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to the sort of the theological point of the question is not religious at all, but we do have to understand what these situations mean. I mean, borders are a function of VAT, customs and standards. So if you're in the single market of EFTA, you'll only have your VAT taken care of. You'll still have your customs and standards issues to be, your customs, your VAT and standards together. You'll have your customs issues. So what I'm saying is, unless you're in a single customs union and single market, with somebody over the border, you will have border checks. So if you're in EFTA, you're going to have border checks. Norway are in EFTA, but have border checks with Sweden. Turkey are not in EFTA, but they're in a customs union and still have border checks because they've got single market checks. So Norway has the customs union checks, Turkey has the single market checks. So if you go into one of the halfways, you'll still have half the checks, which might take just as long. So in the ideal situation would have been independence in 2014, where the EU, rather than be 27 at the moment, would be 29, because had we got independence, then we'd be in the EU. The lunacy of Brexit, which was a sort of a throwback to colonial thinking, wouldn't have happened with the sort of mild shock it would have caused some of these toffs. And therefore, we would have been all been spared that nonsense. So to your question, you've got to decide, do you want a border? If you want a border, you might want a border for various reasons. Then if you're outside the customs union and the single market, you will have a border. If you're in the single market or the customs union, you will still have a border. That's why Turkey is a border. That's why Iceland is a border. That's why Norway is a border, and Liechtenstein and Switzerland have borders too. So these are simple reasons that you do have borders. There's no, and for some people they think, well, we can join EFTA and we won't have a border with the European Union, and we'll keep a customs union with England, we won't have a border with England. Well, you will. Yeah, you'll have one type of border with England, another type of border with the European Union. So you'll have a border with everybody in that situation.
Question though, are there members of EFTA that are in the customs union? But because, for example, you have members of from what I understand, Turkey is a member of the customs union, but obviously not in the EU or EFTA.
It's not in the single market, yeah.
And they are.
No, there's the ones that are in both are members of the European Union, and because then you get a situation where you could be in the single market, the customs union, and not become a member, and then you just be a complete rule taker of that situation. Most countries want to be in that situation and want to frame the rules and have a say at the top table and have some influence rather than just be a rule taker. I mean, Norway and Iceland are huge rule takers as it is, without having any say. As an Australian diplomat told in a committee in a lift when between meetings, we're off to see the Norwegians after we met with the Australians, Canadians, and the Japanese ambassadors. Now you're going to see what it's like to be a vassal state after you talk to the Norwegians in Brussels. They have to, because as many in Norway will say, Tina, there is no alternative. There's a huge market in your doorstep. You can't drive lorries to CPTPP countries or to the Mercosur countries or whatever. You've got this huge behemoth on your doorstep. You've got the haulage being run by Poland, Lithuania, Spain, Spanish drivers. We have to recognize what we have next door to us and deal with that.
Okay. Assuming independence was achieved, what do you think the prospects were moving Trident? I mean, you know more about this than us because you work in Westminster, but given the geopolitical aspects, the defense, UK defense, UK cooperation with NATO and all that, how do you see, what I think is broadly supported within Scotland of removing Trident, but how do you see that in the future?
Well, I mean, I think if any US president or Russian leader needs to wipe out humanity, the requirement of the nuclear weapons on the Clyde aren't a huge factor. They're roughly balanced nuclear weapons, east-west, spread between America, France, and the UK. The amount of warheads the UK has are quite small anyway. The Americans will still have enough to flatten the planet, and we worry about global warming, but these things can fry the planet overnight. That will be the end of any seminars on global warming and COPs once these things go off. So to your question, I mean, I don't think there'd be a huge issue as regards the destabilizing of the world's petrified factor of one another. The issue is, will they go to Devonport? We do know what they said in the past, that they were too dangerous to put in Devonport. That's why they left them on the Clyde. But really,
they're not too dangerous on the Clyde.
No, they're not too dangerous on the Clyde at all. But really, I mean, does the UK need them? What are they playing at? Maybe, I often think of them as a handgun story. People say that you need a handgun in America to keep yourself safe. Should everybody have a nuclear weapon to keep themselves safe? Well, we know in America, when more people have handguns, things tend to go wrong, and the more people with nuclear weapons
Absolutely.
will go wrong.
And just very quickly on that, in the United States, there's the whole thing of the deterrent. The idea that if you have a gun in your house, then it's much less likely that that someone will come in and rob you or kill you. Come in and murder some of your family members. But the problem is that I think it's 40 times more likely that a person in the house kills another person in the house relative to the idea that someone would come, break into the house and use a gun to. So I think that kind of affirms.
Yeah, that's no surprise at all that sort of thing happens. Infants shooting parents or infants shooting siblings is another thing that tragically happens as well. So, but whatever. I mean, I know they say that guns don't kill people; people kill people. Well, you might as well say that cars don't transport people; people transport people. I mean, it's just as nonsensical.
I've used the same one. Toasters don't toast toast; people toast toast.
Yeah, very good. Yes, I like that.
It's a hell of a lot easier with a toaster than it is holding bread over a flame or whatever you would.
That's right. You can extend that. Cookers don't cook food; people cook food. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
Certainly, nuclear weapons will fry the earth. That's one thing we know.
No, exactly. And it's not just people. Well, people could press a button, but it's not the people that fry the earth. Exactly. So, Ian Moynihan, what are the chances we will get independence this time? I mean, how do you? I mean, you're more focused on this than I think most other MPs, and are an advocate of a second way or a different path towards independence. How do you see the next 5 years?
Well, I mean, I want to have independence. I want to have independence now. I see countries like Iceland, Norway, Denmark, whoever, not having their people snatched off the streets by Home Office snatch squads, for instance. Every day we don't have independence, we're losing. So the sooner we can make the case and have a referendum and have the campaign, I think we'll win it. I'm sure we'll win it, in fact. And we'll go on and progress and hopefully leapfrog our good friends in Ireland the way we used to 100 years ago before they got their independence and leapfrogged us and England and Wales and went ahead of us. But, the reality is we talk about referendums. I'd like to get us into a situation where we know we can have it. We can do the background work. We can have the Section 30 asked for. We can start legislating the Scottish Parliament. It doesn't mean you're having the referendum. You start cooking your dinner long before you eat it, to go back to an earlier metaphor. So let's start cooking some of the stuff. We don't have to dine on the referendum yet. But one of the reasons I think I want to see that is I want to find out when Scotland's going to be able to do things, because it's very likely that these referendums are going to be blocked. We might not. Nobody can guarantee at any level in the SNP or the Alba Party, for instance, or the Greens. Nobody can guarantee that we can have a referendum. Now we say that, and then the next breath we're going about talking about having a referendum and becoming independent. Well, let's get ourselves to the place where we have cooked our Section 30. We've asked Boris, and we've got on our no oven ready. No, he's got an oven ready thing, and that's it. And let's go and find out. Do we have the powers? We only had a Section 30 because we didn't reckon the Section 30 exists because we didn't think the Parliament had the powers in the beginning. So they were going to try the weaker route of seeing if we've got the powers and then having that tested in court, and probably finding out we don't have the powers, or having Westminster change the laws to make sure we don't. And therefore, because Westminster are anxious, we don't ask the people, right? Because it's okay for Westminster as long as the people don't say they want independence very clearly, Westminster can argue the margins. So they'll have to block the question. Yeah. And they will block the question. It's no... kid ourselves on that one. So we've got to find a way of asking the people. So we've got to go through these processes. The Section 30, the Scottish Parliament ask. Failing that, then it's another ballot box event that we've got to either wait for or contrive in the meantime. And, I think one of the things of these blockings of referendums is probably got an upside in that people will be quite indignant. They'll be, as they call them, the soft nose, or the ones who are not really engaging with it too much at the moment will engage, and people engage. People get an innate sense of fairness, and they will engage with that, and they will feel it's quite unfair. So Westminster are playing into our hands, and no matter how long it takes, but I'd just rather see it sooner rather than later, so we don't have to have people protesting in Kenmure Street to stop Home Office snatch squads removing valued members of society, a chef and a motor mechanic, and deciding to throw them on a plane and send them back to somewhere they've not been in 10 years at the height of a global pandemic. Because for as long as we don't have those powers and that happens, we're losing. Our society's losing, and the people who are living here are losing, and we're not making the best of all the talents and of all the people. So that's why I'm impatient about this. That's why I want to see at least we start to prepare the dinner, even though we're not perhaps going to eat it. We can get our Section 30 and get Boris's oven ready now. We can start to boil up in the Scottish Parliament the relevant legislation to have it maybe burnt in the courts later on.
And then have another recipe, and then cook up.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a plan in my back pocket for when that happens. Had it been asked incidentally, given the numbers the other week, we would have won the numbers for independence, but we didn't ask the people for that. So now we can't turn around and say that we've got a mandate for independence, even though we've got a majority of votes supporting independent-style voices.
Yes.
It's a different thing. We've got to ask clearly of the people so the people know what they're voting for. We've asked them to back a referendum. They've done that. Now, it just depends. Others are in play for that. And we have definitely got Boris Johnson and the UK government being in the centre of all this. These are the guys we go to appeal to now to be reasonable and sensible. Goodness, imagine, if you were to ask me, how confident am I about a policy where we're asking Boris Johnson to be reasonable and sensible and fair? Of all the UK prime ministers in the past, I mean, none of them were shining beacons of those virtues. But I think the dimmest bulb of them all has to be Boris Johnson when it comes to being fair and decent.
Bulb, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I want to go a couple other questions, and then I'll ask you to say anything you want to say before we say goodbye. And then I'd like to talk to you for a couple minutes after. But let's see. So when are you going to ask Boris, are we in a voluntary union?
That's a good question just to ask Boris. Right. That's a very good question just to put him. I'm going to ask him maybe a written parliamentary question on that. It's a very obvious question to ask. Yeah. Are we in a voluntary union or not? And if we're in a voluntary union, yeah, just get that question asked. Who asked that question? I thank
that was that was Real Scott 1314. Angus, when are you going to ask Boris? Are we in a voluntary union? So
well, thank you, Real Scott 1314. That question will be winging its way to Boris in parliamentary written questions this week.
Excellent. Thank you.
It's so obvious. You know a good question when you hear it. And you've not done it, and it's things you think, wow, that should have been done a long time ago. Is that blooming obvious? It hits you straight.
So thank you, Real Scott 1314, for giving Angus a question that should have been blindingly obvious months ago, but at least it's there now. So we can get on with it.
Absolutely blindingly obvious. Yeah.
What message do you have for the Yes movement?
Oh, I think. The Yes movement are their own amazing, dynamic, active lot. I don't know if they need many messages from me, but there's maybe a message of thanks, a message to keep going, a message to sort of hold politicians' feet to the fire, elected or unelected, that they're making the moves for independence that they should be, and they should be expected from them. Maybe that's a message for them, and it's the message I'm sure that they're directing our way, that we've got to agitate for independence, because there's no point, as I was saying earlier, having our recovery from COVID being dictated to or being formed by the likes of Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. It's a huge opportunity lost, and we can do it better in Scotland. There's no other country going to write to Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson and say, please, can you put your policies that we should have on the back of an envelope so that we can implement them in our countries, because you are somehow far better than us in thinking about how other people should recover than we would be ourselves. I mean, nobody's doing that. It just sounds stupid to say that, but that's the situation of Scotland, and likely will be unless we make some moves soon.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye to our listeners?
No, just thank you for being on, and we'll just see what the time brings. I think we've got to push on and make sure that the referendum options, the Section 30 happens, and probably in the autumn, we have to make sure that we understand what the end of the pandemic means. The Scottish Government's role in that. The Scottish Government have no real huge economic levers. You know, they can do little bits on the side and spend a few bob here that they're given the crumbs on the table. But they're a devolved parliament. They're not got the powers of the h-Eileanan. They've not got the powers of Jersey. They've not got the powers of the Faroe Islands. I'm talking about places sub 100,000 people. Well, I mean, Jersey might be a little bit over. They certainly haven't got the powers of Gibraltar with about 30,000. So the Scottish Government is fairly toothless, really, when it comes to many economic things. I mean, we'd like to think it was better, and we like to shape things differently for Scotland, but in reality, there's not huge things we can do. And so let's not have the weather set by those in Westminster who will probably take us back to austerity, as is their gut instinct whenever they can. Let's make things better for people in Scotland at all levels, and that we can keep our chefs and motor mechanics safe on our streets, contributing to society, without the danger of a van coming to snatch them off and sending them back to parts of the world they've not been in for 10 years or so.
Yeah. Just one last question, because it seems so relevant. How straight were your furrows the other day? Saw you plowing on Twitter.
Yeah, they were quite good, I think. There was a couple of dodgy ones midway. There was a photo on Twitter, and I saw the second snap and I noticed it this morning. I thought maybe I was lucky. The one I tweeted was just then, because there was a little bit, it didn't look so good. But I think actually it wasn't me. It was the ground I was dealing with.
Oh, yeah. We all hear that from croppers.
The bad ploughman blames his ground. You know, that's
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, thanks so much, Angus, for being with us. And if you can stay on for a couple of minutes after, but thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to have you back again soon.
Thank you.
All right.